So welcome to the Comfort Headband tutorial. And let's have a look first of all what you're going to get in your pack. When you order one of the packs, you need to specify whether you want the cotton or the jersey, depending on your skill level and what you're more comfortable with. And you'll see as we go through the tutorial, there are some variances and you do need to watch both sections. So first of all, let's have a look at what you get if you've ordered a pack of the cotton, because those are the ones that we're going to work on first. So let's just tip everything out. And you will get a hank of elastic, a pack of buttons, enough for 2 each on these ones, and a selection of cotton prints, enough to make 15 headbands. Now these ones that have got, just pulled out of the bag here, these are all slightly wider fabrics. They're cut on 150 width fabrics. You will get 4 headbands out of each run of fabric. Some of you have had the lovely packs that have got the elephant print. Those are 110 centimetres wide and you can only get 3 headbands out of each run, so you will have 5 lengths of fabric, so that allows you to get 15. So these you should be able to get 16 out of actually, because you've got an extra one. If you have a go at the jersey, we've got a lovely white with brightly primary coloured handprints on it. We've got a nice blue one with different multicoloured handprints. And then for those who just want a plainer headband, we've got a black and cream, really simple print. They also include a pack of buttons. We've got double the amount of buttons on this one because they've got an extra button on either side to make them a little bit more versatile. No elastic in these packs because we don't need them because the fabric itself is stretchy. Okay, let's put this aside, we'll get to these ones later. So for each headband, we need a strip, a narrow strip, which is going to be the tube to encase the elastic for the strap around the back of the head, and then a wider strip which is going to be the headband. They're all 35 centimetres in length, and the width across the top is 2.5 inches or 6.25 centimetres. That's for the strap. And then the headband again is 35 centimetres or 14 inches in length, and the width is 15 centimetres or 6 inches across. So the first thing we need to do is lay out our fabric. This one's still folded in half. We've got the fold at this end, and we are just going to measure a 2.5 inch strip all the way along the fabric using a sewing gauge. So just grab a chalk pencil or some sort of marker, whatever you prefer to use, and just all the way along. When you're confident that you've got that all marked up, you can either cut with scissors between the marks, or grab your ruler and your rotary cutter and just slice the 2 pieces apart, so that we get our strip for the elasticated band and our strip that we need for the headband. Fold in half both pieces of fabric, and then down the length we are just going to sew both pieces with a 1 centimetre seam allowance away from the cut raw. Well, we're now in the cat-free zone, so I've sewn up all my tubes, and the next job is to just press open all the seams. You can finger press a little bit to get yourself started, and we want this seam in the centre of the band. This is going to be different on the jersey ones, so you need to pay attention on that when you get to the jersey ones, but for this one we're going to press that seam along the centre of the headband and also along the centre of the strap. Just press that seam open all the way down on the headband and on the strap. So now we get to our loop turning, and at this stage you might want to split your long lengths of fabric into 35 centimetre lengths. It's actually quite a bit quicker to do this. Here we are on the last one, and if you're struggling at all to push out the little knotty bit at the top end, the bit that's been twisted, push it through, just tease the end out with the end of the pencil, pull the pencil out the top end, and then take the tube down to the other end. And there we go, all those tubes turned in less than 5 minutes, which is great. There we are with our 32 tubes or loops all turned out the right way and all pressed neatly. Straps and headbands, And then the next job is to cut elastic 20 centimetres or 8 inches long. And then of course we need to feed these into our little straps. Okay, so when you've got them all pinned with the elastic in each end, basically all you need to do now is just secure the elastic in either end of your little headband strap. Now we're looking at the right side of the headband strip. The seam is in that central point on the underside, and we've got the right side of the headband strap, and we're going to put the two right sides together, and we're going to sit this equidistant from either end, so it's in thirds essentially, and then we're going to fold that end over, fold the other end over so that it completely overlaps and encases the strap, and then we're going to pin that in place. Flip it and do the same on the other end, pulling back the elastic so it gives it a nice smooth bit for stitching. Sit it in the centre there, fold, fold and pin, and then we need to sew, oops, pin's bending, and then we need to sew these bits in. Again, you need to make sure this is really nice and secure, so you need to stitch 2 or 3 times across. Okay, neatly stitched, and all this seam allowance has all been 1 centimetre, and then we just need to trim off any bits of excess thread, get rid of any scrappy bits. We don't need to take off any of the fabric, and then we just turn these the right side out, which will encase all of that raw edge in either end. Flip it the other way around. We've got the right side out on the strap, and we've got the right side out on the headband. And the last little job to do to finish these off is to just stitch in the buttons. So remember, we are stitching the buttons in 2.5 centimetres or 1 inch just above that joint there. And if you stitch it through all the way through, you'll encase that little bit of seam allowance, and it'll keep all nice and neat if it goes through the wash. The headbands are actually quite quick to make. You can probably make a single headband in about 15 to 20 minutes. If you're on a roll, you can probably do them in about 10, and stack them all up and do them as a piecework method. You can probably do them a bit quicker than that as well. But now let's have a look at the jersey one. Now this has got a few less steps in it, but it can be tricky just because of the material that we're using. Now the jersey is quite stable, the cotton ones, but we've also got a polyester jersey. That's these ones, and I'm going to make up a strip of these. You do need to be reasonably confident using jersey. If you've never used jersey before, I'm not sure that this is the project to try on, but you know, if you want to have a go, why not, I guess. You need special pins. Generally you need to use ballpoint pins, and you need a ballpoint needle in your sewing machine, so I'll be including a few of those in a little plastic bag, a needle and a few pins in each pack that goes out, unless you specify that you've already got that equipment in that you don't need it. The first thing you need to do is to just sew yourself a nice long tube of jersey. So right side together, pin it if you need to, and then stitch down the long length of the tube. So I just thought I'd show you the stretch stitch on my machine. It's often called a triple stitch or a lightning stitch. So it's the feed dogs that are doing all the work. I don't do anything to manoeuvre the fabric, I'm just holding it to help navigate, so that the fabric coming up to the presser foot is in the right spot and we don't get too much movement. Jersey is quite prone to moving around as it's stitched, and it can sometimes be quite tricky to maintain the appropriate seam allowance because you get creepage. Lovely. The triple stitch helps to keep the elasticity in your jersey fabric. You can see there it's stretching, but also you can see there is still a little bit of tension along the stitch line. If this was a conventional straight stitch, that would literally just be cracking, so you'd be getting gaps and holes appearing in your stitching. If you do have an overlocker, it's definitely the better way to go with the jersey headbands, because there's a lot more length in the stitch of an overlock stitch, and you can see that's really stretching with the fabric. If you did leave yourself quite a long length at the start of your stitching to avoid it getting caught in the feed dogs, now might be a good time to just go and stitch down that short length. So putting the length of the fabric under the presser foot and just sew down to the end. When you've cut your lengths, all you need to do is just turn all your loops. You can use your loop turner or the stretch in the jersey. Makes it a little bit easier to do without if you prefer. Okay, now the next bit is actually quite tricky. Some people would probably prefer to just finish these by hand now, because what we need to do is to hand stitch, or is to stitch the two tubes together, and you need to do this when it's on the right side of the fabric. You can't do it on the reverse because you won't be able to turn it back. I am going to show you the method how to do it on the machine. It will leave about an inch probably open to hand finish closed. So we're going to match up at the seam allowance. We're going to put a pin in there just to hold it, and then I'll show you on the machine how to work your way around the loop. So here we have our pinpoint. You need to make sure that the underside of the fabric is well out of the way when you anchor this onto the machine, keeping it as flat as you possibly can. Drop down your presser foot. I've adjusted my needle position. I've moved it over to the far right, so we're only sewing a 5mm seam allowance. And the job here with your hands is to keep bringing the underside up to meet the top side, so that the two edges of the fabric are lined up together on the machine. And we're just going to anchor it in place, forward and a back stitch. I'm just doing an ordinary straight stitch now. The stretch of the fabric gives us the give that we need. Because of the position of this seam, we don't need to worry too much about doing a triple stitch, and that just adds in another complication that we don't need. So your job while you're sewing these two together is just to keep bringing up the underside and making sure that the edge of your bits of fabric line up neatly, and then you just basically sew a circle. If you've ever made children's clothes, it's like setting the sleeve in on a little girl's dress. Tiny loop that we're sewing around there. You couldn't actually do this with a conventional cotton non-stretch fabric because you won't have the give. You need to be able to pull out the fabric to line it up together and then let go of the stretch while you're sewing. You don't want to be stretching it whilst you're sewing because it will distort it and pull it all out of shape. So you can use the advantage of the stretch while you're lining up your fabric, and then let it go as you sew, because you want the machine and the feed dogs to do the work. Now we're almost as far as we can go here, just one little bit more, just line it up. You see why you can't get all the way around, because the tube, the rest of the tube is now enclosed in that gap. And we definitely need to back stitch here and stitch. Take it off the machine, pull the two ends of the loop, and there you'll see the little inch opening that we have left, which now requires hand stitching to finish. First of all, you just need to close up that hole with a bit of a slip stitch, and then you can sew on the buttons. I prefer to sew my buttons on the machine because I've got a button stitch on there, but you can sew them on by hand. I'll just show you how they're located on the blue one because they show up a little bit better being black buttons. So you can see there my seam, and the buttons are equally distant from that seam allowance. The underside where I finished with hand stitching, and you can see that the seam on this headband is on the edge. We have not set it in the middle. We've had feedback already from a nurse who said that actually if there's tension on that seam, it actually just adds to all the tension, and then they've got masks on, and some of them have got the visors on as well. So keeping it on the edge is much more comfortable to wear. The buttons sit 4 inches from the seam allowance, and then on this one I put an additional button to accommodate different size heads. So we've got 4 inches and then an additional 2 inches apart on either side. Once you've done that, the headband's complete.